appreciate Sasha talking about lean a little bit. And I know that a lot of you in the room have heard Rick and our leadership here at BE talking about driving a lean culture, driving value, eliminating waste, value stream mapping. Some of you have been involved in it, but not many of you actually know what we're talking about. And today I want to provide some context around exactly what is lean, what's it going to do for us, what's value, and what is transactional or even just plain old value stream mapping and what it's going to do for us. So when we start talking about lean and what a lean organization is, it really starts with the customer. It's all about customer focus and delivering value to our customer, whether it's internal or external. Our whole purpose is about delivering value. And it really gets down to how do we reduce waste, which inhibits value. So when I look around the room and I use the term value, I said it the other day, and I think it was you, Arlene, you said to me, well, that's kind of a matter of perception. Your sales, you're the closest person to our customer. I need to ask you, what is our customer's perception of value? Some characteristics of it.
Good product, on time.
Good product on time. Anybody else expand on that? Because I agree, good product on time. Nicole?
Delivering what we say we're going to deliver.
How about if I suggest cost?
Oh, well.
Customers willing to pay for it. They'll take out, does that show value? So we've talked about good product, on time, they're willing to pay for it. Really, those are some key drivers from a customer's perspective. It's really about making sure that we give them what they want, when they want it, creating flow at a price they're willing to pay for it. So when we start framing value, that's what we need to think about every day. The other part of this is waste. Now, you guys went back to your office the other day, yesterday. You'll go back there today. And when you walked in, were people wasting time? Were people busy? I would suspect that when you walked back to your desk and you looked around at all the other buyers, they were pretty busy, weren't they? They had a big stack of paper.
Yes.
A big stack of paper. Keep that thought. Because for me, a big stack of paper on somebody's desk, it simply means they've got inventory. Now, I'm going to challenge a couple of you. I believe that inventory is waste. Nothing's happening to it. It's not moving. It's just sitting. There's 7 wastes that we like to talk about. Defects, we talked about that. It's not the right part. It's not the right quality level. I just talked about inventory. If you go through the list, that inventory, it's waiting. That's just work waiting to be done. It's waste. Talk about overproduction. I believe it was you, Arlene. You talked about rework. Overproduction is rework is a type of overproduction or processing too much. You have to go back and redo it. It's waste. Henry Ford said, time is the biggest waste of all. We can't ever get that back. The other things we can act on, but time, it's gone. And all of these things that we talk about when we talk about waste, it really comes down to time that we could have put to better use. So when we're talking about time, and a lot of you have talked about your processes, although you've talked about your process, about going through the contracts and what you need to do. Arlene talked about it. Sasha touched on it a little bit. Debbie, you did as well. Where do you start when you start talking about your process flows? You talked about 36 steps. Where would you start?
The first one?
The first step? So you'd say, start step number 1. What's the first step in your process?
Logging into the system.
Okay. So that's the first step of your process flow. Well, when I'm talking about process flows, and when I talk about lean thinking, you heard me start off with customer value. Where should I start if I'm starting to talk about my process flow? I'll tell you where I like to start. I like to start at the end. Who's my customer? What is valuable? What is valuable to the customer? And when I start looking at that value proposition, I start saying, well, what in my process is valuable, and what delivers the value that my customer is asking for? Well, I also have to say, well, then what isn't? What's those 7 wastes that I'm going to go back to? So I always start at the end, and I walk backwards through the process. I'm starting to talk about now value stream mapping versus process flow. Because a value stream is just really the series of steps we take to deliver quality or value to our customer. So when I start talking about starting at the customer, I'm talking about you need to define what's important to your customer. What's important? Who are your customers?
We have internal customers and we have external customers. So it can be someone from sales, it can be someone in QA,
What's important to sales?
to make sure that their order ships on time,
What's important to QA?
to make sure the parts we ordered are the parts that the customer actually requires.
You've just defined 2 CTQs, or critical to qualities, of your process. So now, we start at your customer with those 2, you have 2 of them. You start at your customer with those 2 critical to qualities in mind, and you walk backwards through the process. Because you never want to veer too far from your customer, and you want to focus on those 2 items, because that's what you're going to try to deliver, correct?
Yes.
And you want to focus on, does this process step actually flow value to my customer? This slide I have up here, you see there's a bunch of broken links. I would argue that every place that those links are broken, there's siloed operations, and there's waste in between those breaks. Our idea is to really start linking our processes from the end of the process, closest point to the customer, all the way back. Sales is my most important department. They're the closest to the customer. They collect that information. Your downstream customer, that's the most important person in your process. And when we walk backwards through the process, keeping focus on them, we really got to think about the steps. Because if I told you, okay, you have just finished processing that PO, what's the step upstream from that? The last step before you process that PO. I'm not going to keep pushing you on. It's really a hard thing to do. The point is, it is making you think about what you need to do in order to deliver value. Because if I asked you to get up and walk over to that door, it'd be easy. If I told you to turn around and walk backwards, you get to think about it. So it's a concept I need people to think about. So the difference between a standard process flow and a value stream is how we approach it. We start at the end, and we think of how we can create value for our customer, and where the waste points are that stop us from delivering that value to our customers. I want to give you a little example, and this stuff is in your handout, and we'll talk about it in great depth later on during the day, but right now I want to give you an example of value. Maybe it'll hit home to you. What's important when you're watching a football game?
That your favorite team scores.
Hmm?
That your favorite team scores.
Your favorite team scores. How much time do you actually spend watching your favorite team score?
3 hours.
About 3 hours. That's about right.
1 minute,
If I
Frank.
told you the regulation time was 60 minutes, you wouldn't argue. How much is waste? About 2 hours, right? But when you really take a look at it, what's the actual playing time? You said score. You didn't say strategize to score.
Right.
You said score, right?
Right.
They get together, average play,